Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Pursuing Wholeness podcast. My name is Precious, and today I have my friend Sarah joining me. We're going to be talking about overcoming perfectionism and the pressure to perform. So thank you for being here, Sarah.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited, and congratulations on your podcast. I know it's something you've been dreaming of for a while, so I'm really proud of you and excited for you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you want the audience to know about you.
Yeah, so again, my name is Sarah Teutsch, and I am 29 years old. So I'm rounding out my last bit of my 20s, and I am married to Luke Teutsch. We've been married for, it'll be 7.5 years in July.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's flown by. And born and raised in Shreveport, and left for like 5 minutes is what I like to joke. It was 5 months, beginning of college, but came back. That's a whole other story. And I work for an organization called the Hub Urban Ministries. And we live in Madison Park neighborhood, and we have one dog. His name is Xylo, and he's pretty much our child through and through.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of some general things about me.
So on this podcast, we talk a lot about this idea of wholeness. Mm-hmm. So what does wholeness mean to you?
I would say wholeness to me means seeking like growth and restoration for your mind, body, and spirit, and that being pursued through allowing Jesus into every aspect of your life and really growing and shaping and molding you into who he created you to be.
Yes.
So, yeah.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say your wholeness journey has looked like?
So I think for me, my wholeness journey definitely did not fully begin probably until I was in my early to mid 20s. I think growing up as a kid, that's just like a big concept in general to understand is wholeness, and especially as your brain is still like forming right. Like it's not that I maybe didn't desire for those things, but I didn't fully understand what they meant, or at least didn't begin to understand what they meant, because I know we're still really young and growing and maturing in a lot of ways, but I did definitely grow up thinking maybe that it was like compartmentalized, like wholeness in the sense of like, oh, I have to be, all perfect in this area, or like I have to achieve all of this in that area, and not really seeing where those things kind of overlap and mold within one another. Mm-hmm. And so as I was just continuing to explore and learn more of who I was, recognizing again that it's partially allowing Jesus into every aspect of your life, even the ones that you don't really want to share. Yes.
Yeah. Those being the main ones that you need to surrender.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So for the sake of this episode, I'm going to define perfectionism as a refusal to accept any standard short of perfection. Mm-hmm. And then performance as accomplishing a task with the hope of receiving love or approval.
Yep.
I struggle with that a lot. I don't know if you do, but I guess we'll get into it.
Yep.
So can you identify a turning point in your life when you begin to struggle with perfectionism, or has it always been that way for you?
Yeah. I definitely think that there's a degree to which that is just my natural tendency and just my personality. But I know that there were certain kind of just dynamics growing up family and self-image, and dealing with, growing up in being a female. Not that there aren't things that males struggle with as well, but
Sure.
it's definitely related to like body image stuff.
Yes.
For females, and navigating like how do I try to show that I am perfect, because really perfection is just like wanting to be perceived as perfect, like wanting other people to view you a certain way, in which you can control, and obviously there's a degree to which you can't control anything,
right?
Or even if you were, it wouldn't really be true to who you were. It's just what you're wanting to give off.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think just as I got older, wanting to just present myself in a way, mainly because I don't like disappointing people,
right?
Or I want people to know that they can rely on me, or take me seriously, or know that like I'm putting 110% in.
Mm-hmm.
But there was definitely a point at which I was recognizing that was causing me anxiety.
Yes.
It was also just learning like I'm just doing so much striving to be something that is impossible for anyone to uphold. And so I would say, like, growing up, especially in those formative years throughout elementary to high school, when every single person is just trying to navigate, what makes me unique, what makes me special, or, how can I be loved? And it's not that I wasn't being loved,
right,
but it
right.
was just like there was a standard at which I thought like, oh, if I'm anything less than this,
yes,
then then all of a sudden like I'm not going to be worthy of being loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggled with navigating having my hand developed differently from a lot of kids, and just wanting to like fit in, but doing that in a way where it was like I felt like I had to present myself perfectly so that I would just kind of blend in.
Yeah.
Even though you're like subconsciously wanting to stand out, it's like it's a weird dynamic.
It is.
And just as I got older and started to just try to recognize that I didn't have to work so hard, it's very freeing in itself.
Oh, yeah.
And just learning to let go, I think. I can't even tell you the number of times my parents said to me, like, we're not asking you to be perfect, or you don't need to like stress out so much, or it's okay that you made a mistake. And it's like I understood that, but I wasn't willing to accept that or like let it sink in.
Right.
And it just kind of snowballed to this point of having anxiety, or just always wanting to control certain scenarios or certain things, with the best of intentions, but it really, like, in the end of the day, hurting that idea of wholeness.
Yes.
To a really big degree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is the root of it for you?
I would say for me, the root of the perfectionism is really just wanting to feel loved, fully for who I am. And I think that even with perfectionism, there's a huge side of like vulnerability that you're not willing to cross.
Yes.
Because you feel like if you were to open yourself up fully, then maybe someone wouldn't accept what is really there.
Yes.
Or wouldn't feel like it's worthy of being loved or cared for. And so there is this line at which you go like, okay, here's where all my perfectionism is working for me.
Yes.
At least we think, but it's really working against me because, I'll give you these certain pieces of myself, but there's a line at which I'm not willing to cross over that vulnerability. And that's where you really have to learn to just trust that, God is going to meet you in that line. Mm-hmm. And, truly becoming who he created you to be and experiencing true wholeness is willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Which is not
very
easy.
difficult.
Yeah, it's not
especially
easy.
for perfectionists. Yes. I agree. I think for me, the root of perfectionism is also just a desire to be loved and to have approval from others. Just some background about me. My love language is words of affirmation.
Yes, girl.
So I think growing up, I would notice that, you know, if I did well in school, if I behaved well, like things like that, then I would get those words of affirmation. So for me, it was like, okay, so to be loved, which is what I associated, the affirmation, I associated that with love. So to be loved, I have to perform well. And then it became, if I don't perform well, then I'm not loved, which is a lie.
Right.
But that's sort of like the thinking behind, like that was the thinking that I had. And that's kind of where my perfectionism stems from, I think.
Yeah.
And it's still something I struggle with.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
It's hard to realize that I don't have to earn love. Like I'm already loved. I'm already accepted. I don't have to earn it. And so, but yeah, that's been the root of it for me as well.
It's interesting that you say that because it's almost like you do this spiral in your mind of like, I want these words of affirmation. Then you receive them, but then it causes you in moments where you're not receiving them to go like, oh, I must not be loved. Therefore, now I need to try harder.
Yes.
Then I receive that affirmation. And so Luke and I were just talking about that in a certain aspect the other night of like certain things that people can say that for because mine and him's personalities are pretty similar, at least in the roots of it, that like if you say it to us, even as well as intentioned as it is, like our personality is going to take that and go like, oh my gosh, then that just means like next time I have to be even better or X, Y, or Z. And that doesn't mean that other person should stop saying those things. You know, it's definitely like an internal thing of learning to recognize those thoughts and letting them go. But it is interesting how that spiral can happen within your mind.
It's funny. I was talking to one of my friends who's, I think, also is a perfectionist. And we were saying, and he also is a words of affirmation person. And so we were saying how it's crazy that we seek the words of affirmation, but then when we get it, because we're so critical of ourselves, it's like, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
So then like I have to work harder. And then if I don't get the words of affirmation, I'm like, well, dang, like that must have been terrible. Like,
yes, it's so true.
It's like you're never satisfied.
Yeah, you're never satisfied. And then even things like constructive criticism, like I know it's necessary and I appreciate it. And there's the part of me that does want that for growth. But I guarantee you, like, if you come at me a certain way with negativity about how something was wrong, like, I've already berated myself in my mind, basically. And, you know, not saying that's okay or right, but, you know, just recognizing, like, those words have so much more depth.
Yeah, and I think something that's helpful when you're dealing with someone who is a perfectionist, if you are going to give constructive criticism, just make sure you lace it with affirmation.
It's called a sandwich.
Yes.
I've learned. Sandwich, like positives.
So, affirmation, criticism, affirmation.
Yes. Yeah.
That way we can digest it.
Right.
Yes. Do you think perfectionism can be a good thing?
I do believe that there's a degree to which, just from my own understandings and beliefs around it and from things that I've read, where there is a degree to which perfectionism is rooted in this longingness to see creation in the world like fully restored and redeemed back to like what God originally intended in his plan with us.
I've never looked at it that way.
I hadn't either. So it's like this deep desire within yourself, which then makes me feel a little bit better about myself.
Right.
But I think it's also like trying to learn. I have and continue have to learn the difference in like some of the qualities that generally make up a perfectionist, and perfectionism can be two separate things. Like,
yes.
I am a very organized, structured, color-coded, person, and that varies for everyone. And I don't necessarily think all perfectionists are all organized or whatever, but generally there are these certain terms that you use. So then for a long time, I was like, well, everybody is talking about those things, or a lot of people are talking about those things as if they're bad. So then, like, now I don't want to be those things because you're associating them with perfectionism.
Yes.
And I think that there's a degree that you learn, as someone taught me, like a difference in being rigid and being firm. And a lot of that, I think learning what are my expectations. Are they, high expectations? Are they unrealistic expectations for myself, for others, for whatever the situation is? And knowing that, like, it's okay to not always make that mark.
Yes.
You think that you need to.
Give yourself grace.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that perfectionism as a whole is necessarily a bad thing, because I do think some of it, like I said, is rooted in that wanting to restore things back to the way that God created them perfectly. But, if you're having pride or insecurity or, selfishness, or that just, desire to be loved by others, be those motivations behind it, then that's definitely where you can fall into a trap, and never being satisfied with where things are, or who you are.
That's good. You mentioned that you have started to kind of find freedom from perfectionism. So I wanted to know, how do you overcome the pressure to perform in your life?
It's definitely still a learning experience every day. I think one of the best things for me has just been learning how to recognize when I'm having those thoughts of, like, this needs to be perfect, or understanding my motivation behind things.
Yes.
Even down to, like, feeling pressured to say yes to something, but I really want to say no, or vice versa, and going like, well, what is my motivation behind that? Is because I want
you are literally in my notes. Literally in my notes. I was like, it's not the action itself that is bad, but the motive behind the action.
Yeah. Luke and I do a lot of back and forth of, like, well, why do you feel like you need to do that? Or what is the motivation? Is it just because you want people to like you? Is it because you want to feel accepted? Because then that's just striving, and that's not what God has called us to. And so, like, checking that is a really big thing. I think also, just as I'm getting older, learning to love who I am and who God has created me to be, and being willing to accept that. I think as we've both talked about, we're pretty introverted people, and growing up, I very much compared myself to people who weren't, and feeling like, well, why am I not more outspoken, or why am I not the, life of the party, or the funny person, or, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And then I would play the comparison game and the perfectionism game along with those individuals. And there are still degrees to which I have to watch myself from that, and just day-to-day things of, like, well, why am I not more flexible, or why, and part of, there is a growth aspect of learning to maybe meet and compromise in the middle with those things. But learning to just accept who I am and find uniqueness in how God has created me to be has definitely helped a lot. And again, it's still an everyday just reminder of saying, God has created me to be this person, and I don't need to try to be anybody else.
Yes.
And then I would say the last thing that's really helpful is learning to stop the negative spirals, like negative mind spirals.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes that looks like literally, like, I'm having a thought, now it's going down, now it's going way down, and just being like, no, we're going to stop that. Like, you know who you are, you know the purpose that God has given you, you know why you were created, and you don't need to go there. And, you know, sometimes I have to say that multiple times in order to like reframe, because for me, I'll have this moment of like, I have this negative thought, then I'm mad at myself for having the negative thought, and then I'll get worked up, and it just becomes, now I'm like mad that I'm worked up. And so it just spirals down.
Out of control. Yes, so, I can relate to that.
Yeah. So just learning and learning to give myself, learning to accept the grace and mercy that God has given me, in those moments of like, it's okay. And like, we're continually just learning and growing and trying this again, have been kind of like the three things that I feel like have really helped me in continuing, you know, this journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. I loved everything you said. What has helped you rest in the perfect love of God?
Yeah. I would say that learning how to not strive so much, striving to be or do or please or create, especially based on like expectations of what I've put on myself unrealistically, or maybe what society has placed on me. And also just like, I understand that in some ways this like hustle culture is based around, you know, like maybe striving to do good or whatever, but that in itself can be really bad. Of just thinking like you've always got to be going. And so over the last 2 years, Luke and I have, and I bring him in obviously because we're married. So like, we're doing some of these things together, have really been trying to understand and really practice Sabbath, and setting aside time, you know, to truly like to stop and resist and rest and delight, and carrying that throughout the week, not just for the 24-hour period of Sabbath. And that has been really challenging because it means you have to let go of a lot of the pressures that you've put on yourself.
Right.
And so I think just resting in that, and also knowing we have this one of these like little felt boards similar to the one behind you in our home. And for a long time I had a quote that was like from this author and social worker Brene Brown, that was like, you know,
I love a lot of her quotes.
Me too. I'm definitely a fangirl of hers. I've read a bunch of her things, and she had this quote that was like, you know, no matter what does or does not get done today, you are enough. And taking that and really holding that tightly, especially as someone who views like accomplishing tasks as like equating to like success or worth. So knowing like I literally could have just laid on the couch all day and I still have worth and value. I could have like gone and like knocked something out of the park at work and I still have that same worth and value, you know, and truly learning to embrace that has helped me to rest, and, you know, still continues to teach me that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that perfectionism is also kind of rooted in fear, because
for sure.
you're fearful that you're not going to be accepted, or you won't be loved, or like you had mentioned earlier, like a lot of people who are perfectionists struggle with vulnerability. And so it's like, if I allow you to see like how I really am, or what it really is, then you won't accept me. Yeah. And so I love the scripture that the perfect love of God casts out fear. So when you're able to just rest in that, you know, it frees you from that mentality that like I have to perform, I have to earn God's love, like or people's love, whatever. So
yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like the fear of, well, what is this person going to think of me if they really know like what I actually believe about this, or how I actually feel about this, or, you know, all of the above. And it can be tricky because I do think that means there is a degree to which you learn vulnerability with everyone, but then also knowing, like, finding the right people that you can be vulnerable with. Because I do think it's like, if you're going to choose to be really vulnerable, you're hoping that you can trust the person that you're, you know, being vulnerable with, especially if, you know, for an individual that has perfectionistic tendencies, where you're like practicing, you know, and it's not just a natural vulnerability overflow, you know, is really beneficial to have people that you can do that with. And I know that that's not the case for everyone, that they don't necessarily feel like they have those people. But sometimes I do think we don't have those people. If you're a person in general, but specifically struggle with perfectionism because you're not willing to allow yourself to be vulnerable, therefore you're not getting that vulnerability in exchange.
Right.
So sometimes you have to check yourself and see, like, do I not have these people because maybe it's me that's not allowing for them, you know? And I've had conversations with people, and I can't even remember how ours went, but where I've literally been like, look, I'm just going to put it all out there. Like, I'm just trying, you know, and maybe that's like silly, but I would just rather be extremely upfront at this point in my life and go, like, you know, if that means that we're going to have a connection, then great. And if not, that's okay too.
Right.
But yeah, I just think that that's a big part of it.
Oh yeah, it is. What encouragement would you offer anyone who struggles with perfectionism?
The same encouragement that I try to give myself, I guess,
daily.
Is just like, it's okay. You know, when you mess up, it's okay. Like, there's a difference in saying, you know, I messed up versus I am a mess up, you know?
Yes.
And being willing to just start over the next day and try again, and to give yourself that space to continue to learn and grow, and just challenge people to learn to love exactly who they are, not what they feel they should be or are supposed to be.
Yes. I love that. This has been amazing.
Thank you. It's been so fun.
Yes. Thank you for being here. Where can our listeners connect with you online?
Well, you can connect with me on the old Facebook. I did have the Instagram, but in the same line.
Yes.
There was a time that I couldn't do it anymore. And I'm like, I already have enough going on critically in my brain. I can't add to it with media.
Social media is a big trigger for a perfectionist.
Yeah. And there are people who can manage that and maintain that really well. And, you know, I would say I wish I could be like them, but like, we're trying not to do that. So I'm just gonna go back to the old Facebook. So that's where you can find me.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
I think this has been a very helpful conversation for people. So I appreciate you being willing.
Yeah, of course.
And thank y'all for joining us. We'll see you next time.